Now in this video, I want to cover something that I never hear anybody talking about. This may be one of the most important statistics in fantasy football to make projections. This may be one of the most important statistics in fantasy football to identify valuable quarterbacks, overall offenses that we want to be targeting, and just team environments that are going to be favorable versus handicap your fantasy football players. Now, what I want to do is I want to first prove this statistic and its importance to you. And then later on in the video, I'll show you the teams that are very safe bets to be fantastic in this category. And then I'll show you some breakout teams at the end that I think maybe their current players are a little bit undervalued. We can go out and we can target based on a possible improvement in this one area. But before we get into it, please go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football, and let me know your thoughts down there in the comment section. I know this is going to be a little bit more complex, and maybe it's not as simple as going, Mason, you idiot, stop drafting Michael Thomas. You have no idea what you're talking about. Yes, I know it's easy to go down there and leave that comment, but I would like to hear your opinion on this. And let's dive right in and let's cover the importance of pace of play. Now, I understand this is not something that too many people discuss, but there's a very cool tool on RotoViz. This is not sponsored by RotoViz by any means, but we'll cover the pace of play and you can set different parameters. Because of course, if you go down there and you just look at what teams are running the most plays per game, that's not necessarily going to be predictive going forward because there are so many different things that go into that. A team's going to slow down their pace of play whenever they're up by 2 to 3 touchdowns. If you're up by 2 to 3 touchdowns and you're going to snap the ball when there's still 15 seconds on the play clock, what the hell are you doing? Of course, nobody's going to do that. You're going to take it down. You're going to drain the clock and vice versa. If you're a very bad offense and somehow you find yourself being the Jacksonville Jaguars, you're down by multiple touchdowns every time you get to the third quarter, you are going to be snapping that ball with 20 seconds left on the clock to the best of your ability. But over there on RotoViz, you can actually set this to game neutral environments. So what that's going to do is it's going to remove the 2-minute drill. It's also going to remove any time in a football game that you have a team up by more than a touchdown. So we are only going to be looking at plays. We are only going to be looking at snaps where both teams are within 7 points of each other. And on top of this, they are not in the 2-minute drill, skewing these statistics. So if we go just year by year, let's look at 2021 as the most recent example of teams that push the pace of play in game neutral environments. At number 1, most people who run projections should know this by now. You have the Dallas Cowboys. At 2, you have the Los Angeles Chargers. At 3, you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 4, you have the Pittsburgh Steelers. And at 5, you have the Buffalo Bills. Now, what do these teams have in common? Not only do they have elite level quarterbacks from an NFL standpoint, think about it. If you're a head coach, hell, if you have Tom Brady, if you have Justin Herbert, if you have Dak Prescott, if you have Josh Allen, you're probably wanting to run as many plays per game, knowing that every play you get off, you just give yourself a slightly higher edge than your opponent. And maybe you remove some of the randomness with a larger sample size throughout the course of a game overall. But you see these teams have those elite level quarterbacks. Not only do they have the elite level quarterbacks, but they support a ton of options in fantasy football. If we just go through these offenses, we see the Dallas Cowboys leading the NFL in pace of play in game neutral environments. Who scored the most points this year? Dallas. Now, a lot of this production was spread out between Cedric Wilson, Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz, Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard. So it is hard to put a concrete thing saying, oh, okay, well, this provided us a wide receiver 1, a wide receiver 2. No, that didn't work out in Dallas this year. But you did have a top 24 wide receiver in CeeDee Lamb. You had a top 30 wide receiver in Amari Cooper. You had a running back 2 in Ezekiel Elliott, a running back 3 in Tony Pollard, a top 5 tight end in Dalton Schultz, and a top 10 quarterback in Dak Prescott. This is why if you go over there on Underdog Fantasy right now, the very smart drafters are already pushing up someone like CeeDee Lamb to be drafted as a mid wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Because if you combine the pass to run ratio, and you combine that with the pace of play this offense should be at, and you condense the target tree compared to where it was last year by removing the combination of Amari Cooper as well as Cedric Wilson, all of a sudden, guys like CeeDee Lamb, Dalton Schultz are going to be in one of the most favorable environments in football. And that's why you see Dalton Schultz has risen almost 2 rounds in underdog drafts just over the past 1 to 2 months with almost nothing happening at all. Hell, you can tell those very smart drafters, the people who really know what they're doing, they're taking this into account. You should as well. And of course, if you want to go draft on Underdog Fantasy, have some fun in your life, make sure you go to the link in the description, go to the link in the comment section, sign up for Underdog Fantasy, and use promo code FLOCK when you sign up, because they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to 100. You'll get our 2022 rankings, our dynasty rankings, our dynasty rookie rankings, our dynasty rookie draft guide. You will support this channel, and way more importantly, you'll be able to hop into drafts with us in the live stream, hop into drafts in the public lobby, and have some fun. But let's move over to our next offense for an example of this. You have the Los Angeles Chargers at 2, where here this offense was able to provide us the quarterback 2 overall in fantasy in Justin Herbert. You had Austin Eckler as the running back 3 overall, Keenan Allen the wide receiver 12, Mike Williams the wide receiver 15. We can see the same thing in Tampa. Tampa has 2 top 12 wide receivers in Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They have a top 3 tight end in Rob Gronkowski. They have a top 5 running back in Leonard Fournette. They have a top 3 quarterback in Tom Brady. And I know you're going to say, well, Mason, are we sure this isn't just due to the elite level quarterbacks that these offenses have? I mean, maybe this is not really predictive at all, where what I would say is, hell, let's go over to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was top 5 in this single category, and you see them getting so much volume that they provided you a top 10 wide receiver, a top 10 running back, a low end tight end 1, high end tight end 2 in Pat Freiermuth, with one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL with an adjusted yards per pass attempt basis, as a 39-year-old Ben Roethlisberger couldn't push the ball down the field. So if you're racking up so many passing attempts, if you're racking up volume in your offense by pushing the pace of play, you're going to be able to overcome that bad quarterback, and you're going to be able to provide a ridiculous amount of value. I don't need to talk about the Bills. You know that the Bills are great, but let's go to 2020 and let's specifically focus in on teams that had bad quarterback play overall, because we can go back and look at that Pittsburgh Steelers team as the perfect example. It's a horrible team, but if you're pushing the pace of play, you will be productive. So let's ignore Arizona with Kyler Murray putting up a mid quarterback 1 season, a top 5 wide receiver season in DeAndre Hopkins. Let's ignore the Dallas Cowboys, where Dak Prescott was by far and away the quarterback 1 before he goes down to his injury. Let's possibly ignore the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because they had Tom Brady if they're going to put up production. But I will say Ronald Jones was even a top 24 running back. And let's focus in on 2 very bad offenses that have bad quarterback play that were still able to put up elite level fantasy football options because they had this kind of pace of play. We're going to look at the Tennessee Titans, and we are also going to be looking at the Washington football team, not going to say Commanders. Here with Washington, you had Antonio Gibson as a mid running back 2. You had Terry McLaurin as a mid wide receiver 2 as well. This is with some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. In Tennessee, Ryan Tannehill posted a top 12 season. A top 12 season here at the quarterback position. Derrick Henry, of course, was the top 3 running back. A.J. Brown was the wide receiver 7 on a per game basis as a second-year player. And in 2019, we can see that there are some other top offenses. You have the Rams, the Cardinals, you have Matthew Stafford in Detroit, you have the Giants, which is surprising, but think about Saquon Barkley in that year, and you have the Buffalo Bills as an indicator of maybe this should have been the elite offense that we are expecting to break out all along. So now I hope I've done a good enough job of explaining the importance of pace of play for you and how it will just derive so much offensive volume, even if you lack quarterback efficiency. While, yeah, you're not going to put up the multiple wide receiver 1 seasons like you can expect from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or the Los Angeles Chargers, where you have quarterback efficiency and pace of play volume just coming together to provide an elite situation, you're still going to be able to overcome bad quarterback play to be pretty good fantasy assets overall. But let's talk about the safe options, the safe bets to lead the NFL in pace of play this upcoming season, or at least be at the very top. You have the Arizona Cardinals, which really stick out to me as an offense that was number 1 in pace of play in 2019, number 1 in pace of play in 2020 as well. Now, of course, this number did come down in 2021, but you had an injury to Kyler Murray. You had an injury to DeAndre Hopkins. So Cliff Kingsbury and this coaching staff is not going to continue to run the same exact game plan when your wide receiver 1's Christian Kirk and your quarterback 1 is Colt McCoy. Of course, you have to adjust, but they were still average to above average in pace of play this season, where they were the 12th team in pace of play in game neutral environments. So I would say with a healthy Kyler Murray, with DeAndre Hopkins coming back in week 7, or maybe Hollywood Brown just being a flat out upgrade over Christian Kirk, that we can expect Arizona to go back to being a top 5 offense in this category this upcoming season. And if that's going to be the case, Hell, if we head over to Underdog Fantasy right now, this is a team that's probably a little bit undervalued because you have Kyler Murray. While yes, he does at least go in a respectable range, this is going to be the lowest we've seen Kyler Murray since after his rookie season. And on top of that, if we are going to head over and if we are going to look at what you have with DeAndre Hopkins, while yes, you need to lower him because he's going to miss the beginning portion of the season, but still, this is a wide receiver that is now going as a wide receiver 4 in fantasy drafts. You see Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown's getting pushed up. I don't necessarily want to make the argument for Hollywood here, but James Conner's going at the end of round 3 on Underdog Fantasy. I would say if Arizona is able to push that pace of play as they once did, I think almost all these guys can outproduce their ADP. Going over, another safe option that you have is going to be the Buffalo Bills. Now with Buffalo, of course, this is priced in, but they were the number 5 offense in pace of play in 2019, the number 12 offense in 2020, and the number 5 in 2021. This is a very good team that if we were to only look at good weather games, I'm sure they would actually finish a little bit higher than this because if you're playing in Buffalo in the winter, you're probably going to slow down that pace of play ever so slightly. But this is already priced into the market. People are drafting friggin' Stephon Diggs in the middle of round 1. I am as well. People are drafting Josh Allen as the quarterback 1 off the board. People are drafting Gabriel Davis as the top 24 wide receiver. So yeah. While we do want to say that Buffalo's a pretty safe bet to have an elite pace of play this upcoming season, it's not like you can take advantage of it in fantasy football drafts. Dallas is a very safe option as well. Dallas was number 6 in 2019, number 2 in 2020, and number 1 in 2021, coming off a season where they also scored the most overall points in the NFL. But can we take advantage of this? Not necessarily. I mean, if we look at this, Dak Prescott's being drafted inside the top 10 quarterbacks. You have Ezekiel Elliott being drafted as a mid running back 2. You have Tony Pollard being drafted almost as the top 24 running back. People are really on that Tony Pollard train. And the number 1 indicator that people are really, really high on this situation is looking at Dalton Schultz as a tight end that is now being drafted closer to George Kittle than TJ Hawkinson in a lot of these drafts. It is baked into that price point. CeeDee Lamb sneaking into round 1 of some of these drafts as well, despite CeeDee Lamb never posting a top 15 finish at the position. So Dallas, it's already baked in. Tampa, it's baked in as well. Tampa, with Jameis Winston in 2019, they were a little bit lower, but of course they were with Jameis Winston. They were top 5 in back-to-back years with Tom Brady, but I can't come out here and scream that everybody in Tampa is undervalued. I mean, you have Mike Evans sneaking into the back half of round 1. Now that you had Rob Gronkowski retiring, you have Russell Gage skyrocketing up drafts. I've seen Russell Gage get drafted as a top 30 receiver. I've seen Chris Godwin slide because of the injury. I think you could make the argument that Godwin is potentially a little bit undervalued, but it's not necessarily because of the pace of play by any means. Leonard Fournette also being drafted as a running back 1. Tom Brady, top 10 quarterback. So no, you can't take advantage of it with Tampa. So these safe options, they're almost already baked into the market. I would say that maybe the only team that people are underrating ever so slightly would be the Arizona Cardinals based on where they are going this year compared to where those ADPs shook up last season. And I think this upcoming year, we can expect them to be much more in line with their overall game plan, what they had in the previous 2 years, given the health of Kyler Murray. But let's go to the exciting part of this video. Let's try to bring out this crystal ball. And of course, this is going to be much harder. I can safely say, hell, you are going to have the Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys pushing that pace of play. But a couple other teams that I think could surprise people this upcoming season. The first one, the New York Giants. Now with the Giants, I think looking at their pace of play, going back to 2021, probably not going to be too useful, just given the fact that you had the injury to Daniel Jones. You didn't have Saquon Barkley fully healthy. And on top of that, if we are going to be looking at this receiver core, Kenny Golladay missed a ton of time. Sterling Shepard missed time. I mean, this was a much worse wide receiver core this past season than what you will have this upcoming year. So you're possibly getting a healthy quarterback, a healthy running back, an improved receiver core, but most importantly, Brian Daboll's coming over from Buffalo. And what we saw in Buffalo with Brian Daboll as their offensive coordinator is we saw this team push the pace of play. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that he's going to be able to come out, he's going to be able to turn Daniel Jones into Josh Allen. Of course, if I thought that was going to happen, hell, I should be putting my money where my mouth is. I should have 100% of Kenny Golladay drafted. I should have 100% Saquon Barkley, 100% Daniel Jones. And while maybe I'm overweight on some of those players, it's not like I'm necessarily drafting them in every single league, but I would not be surprised, to say the least, if the New York Giants are actually better than people expect this upcoming season with their pace of play and points scored overall. And if we're looking at this, Daniel Jones currently being drafted as the quarterback 21, going behind someone like Matt Ryan, I personally don't understand that, because I think we can get almost more excited about Daniel Jones' depth of his weapons in the receiving game. And on top of that, Daniel Jones has some sneaky rushing upside where we shouldn't be surprised at all if Daniel Jones gets to 450 rushing yards this year and he possibly picks up 6 rushing touchdowns. And to have that type of rushing production where Matt Ryan just simply doesn't have access to it, that is very exciting. And if you're going to go ahead and look at the other prices of these New York Giants pass catchers, I mean, they are extremely affordable. You have Kadarius Toney as the wide receiver 44, despite being an elite option on a yards per route run basis last year. You have Kenny Golladay as the wide receiver 57. You have Wan'Dale Robinson as the wide receiver 80. So I think that if you were to have the New York Giants sneaking in to being a top 5, top 6, top 7 team with their pace of play this upcoming season, you could see almost every single player in New York exceed their ADP. Y'all know we've already talked about Saquon Barkley, but let's move over to some of these other sneaky options, in my opinion. A team that was very bad with their pace of play last year was actually a bottom 5 offense, was the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, this is surprising because you still had T. Higgins, you still had Jamar Chase producing elite level seasons, but that was because this offense was hyper efficient. Now, we've talked about this before, but I think there's almost hidden upside with the Cincinnati Bengals. I think this could be a team that maybe turns into the 2019 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where no, you don't necessarily have the 30 interceptions from Joe Burrow, but you do have Joe Burrow as a candidate to lead the NFL in overall passing yards. You have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins as candidates to potentially both at the same time finish as top 5 wide receivers, considering that this team just simply does not spread the ball out. They highly concentrate their offense between 3 receivers and 3 receivers alone. If we assume that Higgins and Chase continue to get better as they're only, 22, 23 years old, maybe we even see a smaller target share, and that's at least what the market's telling us currently with Tyler Boyd. So I think we could not necessarily see Cincinnati go to be a top 5 offense with their pace of play, but we could see Cincinnati at least pick up the pace of play where if they regress ever so slightly with their efficiency, you may not even feel it just because they're going to be running more plays per game. And I think it could be very exciting for this offense. This is one of the reasons I have Joe Mixon as their running back 5 this season. Keep in mind, it would make a lot of sense if you're Sean Taylor, if you are the coaching staff and you are going to see Joe Burrow leading the NFL in sacks, probably you want to limit the amount of plays you're running overall. Now, a team that was horrendous last year and is always really close to the bottom of the NFL with their pace of play is going to be the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I don't necessarily know if this is a function of just the Kyle Shanahan offense or maybe what Kyle Shanahan did in particular with Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, there is some uncertainty with this team having Trey Lance at the quarterback position. Now, I don't necessarily want to say that, hell, this is a team that should be top. No. Maybe I'm just getting too excited with Trey Lance. Y'all know that's my guy. But at the end of the day, I think that there is some uncertainty. And if you were to see this team go out there and with Lance feel like they're more confident overall, maybe this unlocks that hidden elite ceiling from George Kittle, who has been the best player in the NFL with his yards per route run over the past 3 years. The best player in the NFL, not the best tight end. If you're looking at yards per route run, George Kittle's the number 1 guy overall. Now, let's go to one offense that, it could be exciting. Could be very exciting. The Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles going into year 2 with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. Adding in A.J. Brown, speaking of yards per route run, the only receiver that's been better in yards per route run over the past 3 years on average has been Devontae Adams. We saw that the Tennessee Titans back in 2020, when they had a fully healthy A.J. Brown, a fully healthy Derrick Henry, decided to push the pace of play despite their quarterback being Ryan Tannehill. And if that were to happen in Philadelphia, despite this being an offense that probably wants to run the ball over and over and over again, there may be enough volume to go around for both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith to return value on their ADP. Now, I'm not jumping up and down with excitement to draft either one of those wide receivers, but what I will say is, it's getting to the point where Jalen Hurts is one of my most drafted quarterbacks in fantasy, because you look at this team as an offense that has the best offensive line in football that has quite possibly a top 10 receiver now in A.J. Brown. Devontae Smith going into year 2. Dallas Goedert's been a hyper efficient player so far to start his NFL career. I think there's hidden upside in Philadelphia. And then our last offense we're going to talk about, I know a lot of people are on this team to really take that step forward this upcoming season. The Las Vegas Raiders. With the Raiders, it would make sense now that you are getting the new coaching staff being able to implement their system throughout the entire year. You don't have John Gruden there. You have Devontae Adams coming in. Darren Waller should be healthy this upcoming season. I'm not necessarily assuming it's going to happen with Las Vegas, but I am worried about the target share taking a dip down, as well as the efficiency with Devontae Adams going to a team that has more target competition overall, as well as a worse quarterback. But if he is going to an offense that somehow is top 5, top 10 in pace of play compared to where the Green Bay Packers were at over the past few years, maybe there can be so much more offensive volume that he can make up for the drop in efficiency as well as the drop in his target share. Now, of course, thank you so much for being a part of the Flock Sport of the channel. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope you got something from it. And if you have not done so already, please go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day and hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.